Chapter 4. Have been taken. It's been a few hours since Kagome and the others stayed in the village. She told the villagers that he was just a friend who traveled along with them. Kagome made the idea of how Sesshomaru disguised himself as a human so they won't notice him as a demon. Sesshomaru slept on the big white puffy around him that made himself comfortable. Right now, they were in the hut and lighting up some fire to cook some meals. Kagome was cooking something for Rin as she was taking care of her. Sesshomaru thought she's been a good mother to Rin, but is only 15 years old. But one day, she could be a good mother to her. Jockin laid beside the two-headed creature while falling asleep. Rin looked at Kagome and began to talk to her. Kagome? Yes, Rin? She asked. Has Inuyasha ever loved you? It was a sad question. Kagome looked away with a sad look on her face. She began to shake her head and tell her, Well, Inuyasha never loved me, Rin, she murmured. He just treated me like a slave, or even his shard detector. I just hate the way Inuyasha was being disrespectful to me. I thought he loved me when we both traveled together to find the jewel shard. I understand, Rin murmured back. Does he love somebody, Kagome? She sighed, glancing down her honey-brown eyes as she remembered her past. Flashback. She went to follow the soul collectors and went to go hide in the bushes. She saw the familiar man with long white hair, white ears, and amber eyes. She knew it was Inuyasha who went to go sneaking around to see Kikyo, the dead Miko, and the soul collector. Inuyasha? Why is he sneaking away for? Is it because he still loves her more than me? Inuyasha, do you love someone else more than me? Kikyo questioned him, giving him a beautiful smile on her face that made Kagome feel a bit depressed. Does she mean me? Kagome heard him chuckle. Kikyo, I never loved that wench like Kagome, he told her. I love you more than ever. When he told her everything about his confessions, they then pressed their lips against each other's, which made Kagome cry. Inuyasha, how could you? Kagome then ran away from those two lovebirds. How could Inuyasha say that to me? And how could he say that he loves her more than me? Flashback ends. Kagome sighed sadly. I don't want to talk about it, Rin. She murmured, giving her a smile on her face. The past is the past. We have to move on. We can't worry about everything. Okay, Kagome, Rin said. We should get some rest, Kagome told her. Tomorrow will be the day. Rin smiled. Okay. After the conversation, the two of them were getting some rest as they cuddled up with each other. Kagome wrapped her right arm around Rin's shoulders, then they began to fall asleep. Kagome wondered how her friends were doing after she has gone away from the group for almost 2 days. The next day. It was morning. Kagome and Rin went to the forest to pick some berries and herbs for medicine. Kagome thought Rin was a good helper while picking some blueberries together. Kagome had told Sushomaru and Jockin that they wanted to make blueberries in Japanese food for breakfast, which means Sushomaru was fine with it. Kagome brought her sacred arrow just in case if she and Rin were in danger. All of a sudden, she heard a noise from the bush. Kagome spun around slowly as she sensed something. I can sense the shards, but I wonder what the demon looks like, she thought as she stared at the bushes. Rin noticed there was something wrong with Kagome. She stood beside her, then tipped her green skirt. Kagome, what's wrong? She asked as she sounded a bit nervous. I don't know, Rin, she murmured, but something isn't right here. When Kagome got closer to the bush, she saw something was approaching them from the bushes. They knew it was the bear. Bear! Rin screamed in horror. The bear roared as it approached them. Kagome had sensed the shards were inside of its forehead. She noticed it was the demon bear. Run, Rin! Kagome shouted, pushing her away, then running away from the bear. They ran as fast as they could. They headed to the bramble bushes where it was safe, but they headed to the big cave where Rin will be safer. Well, some bears live in the cave when the child wasn't here in the cave. Kagome had no choice but to put Rin in the cave. Kagome had a plan for how to distract the bear. She grabbed the rock, then threw it at the bear. She watched the bear turn its head and noticed it was her who threw the rock. "Hey over there!" Kagome shouted at the bear. "Come and get me!" The bear roared, then began to chase her down. Kagome ran as fast as she could when she headed to the cliff. She stood at the edge of the cliff as she glanced down at the river. It reminded her of the past when Inuyasha tried to kill her. He pushed her off the cliff, then fell into the big river. She snapped out of her thoughts and saw the bear was approaching her. Suddenly, she glanced at the small bridge where she can cross it. She headed to the bridge, then ran for her life as the bear is still chasing her. But she stopped. She needed to get the shard from the bear's forehead. She pulled out the sacred arrows slowly, then pointed at the bear's head. She tried to take a deep breath while focusing on herself. As she was ready to take a shot, she let go of the string, and then the arrow hit the bear in the forehead that made it scream in pain. When the bear died, the small bridge ended up falling apart and the bear fell into the big river. She watched the bear's body flooding in the river. It ended up landing on the riverbank. She was glad she didn't lose the shard. Kagome jumped in the river and headed toward the bear's body. She picked the shard and then purified it with her bare hands. Now that wasn't so bad, was it? After this, she headed back to the cave where Rin was safe. When she checked out to see if Rin was okay, she noticed there is something wrong. There was a silent treatment inside the cave. She went inside the cave and realized Rin was gone. Chapter 5. Rescuing Rin. If you all want to know what happened to Rin, well, here's a flashback before Kagome left her in the cave. Rin sat alone in the cold cave by herself while waiting for Kagome to return right before defeating the bear. Rin saw the monk coming through the cave and saw her sitting alone. The old monk noticed Rin was an orphan, which means he could bring her to safety. "Little girl, come with us," the old monk said, approaching her. Rin looked at the monk, then looked away. "I'll be fine by myself," she told the monk, glancing down at the rocky ground. Without a warning, she was being carried by the monk and brought to the other monks. Rin struggled to break free, but there was no use. He won't let her go, and Rin wanted to scream for Kagome. "Let me go!" Rin begged. "Put me down! I want Kagome! I want Kagome and Lord Sesshomaru!" "Why do you struggle from your saviors?" the old monk asked, glancing down at the little girl. "Because I'll be fine by myself," Rin said with an angered look on her face. "I only want Kagome and Lord Sesshomaru." "I've heard enough from you, stubborn little girl," the old monk snapped, walking towards the other monks who were standing in the line. "Sesshomaru!" Kagome yelled out his name, running towards the demon dog and the green light creature Jockin. When she stopped running, she was panting heavily in front of them. "Kagome?" Sesshomaru blinked in surprise. "Kagome, what's wrong?" Jockin asked worryingly. "And where's Rin?" Kagome felt her tears falling down from her eyes. Sesshomaru knew she was crying because she blamed herself for leaving Rin behind. "Rin's been taken," Kagome cried as she covered her face. "I'm so sorry. I didn't protect Rin. When I sent Rin to the cave, I noticed she was taken. This is all my fault and I didn't protect her." Sesshomaru walked towards her, then embraced her to stop making her cry. She blinked her honey brown eyes, glancing up at his face in surprise. "Don't blame yourself, Kagome," he said with a soft voice. "It's not your fault. We'll find Rin no matter what." "I bet the monks from the village have taken Rin. I know it," Jockin pointed out. Kagome gleamed her eyes. "You sure?" "Yes, I'm positive," Jockin said. "Right before we stayed in the village, I saw the monks were looking right at us and noticed we're demons. But you and Rin were not demons." Sesshomaru started to walk away and told them, "Then let's go save Rin," he said. "We don't have much time." Kagome watched him leaving in confusion. "Right now?" He glanced his eyes at her, then nodded his head. "Yes, now." Back with Rin. "You'll be sorry when Lord Sesshomaru and Kagome show up," Rin shouted, still struggling to break free from the old monk's left arm. But he was still holding her. "Be quiet, child! the old monk commanded her with a frown look on his face. Rin then began to yell out their names, calling out for help. Lord Sesshomaru! Kagome! She called out their names in echo. Please help me! Lord Sesshomaru and Kagome, huh? He murmured. Suddenly, the monk then heard a noise from the bushes. He began to throw the Japanese word tags at the bushes, then there was an explosion. When it exploded in the trees, they noticed Sesshomaru has finally arrived to save Rin. All the monks were in shock to see Sesshomaru survive the explosion. Lord Sesshomaru, you came, Rin said happily. Sesshomaru glared at the monk as the smoke disappeared. All the monks were in shock while staring at the demon dog. Rin was so happy for being rescued by Sesshomaru. Rin began the struggle more. Now let me go, she said as she kept struggling and kicking him back. What have you done, demon? The monk said, keeping Rin away from him. Have you bewitched this young girl? Sesshomaru walked towards the monks as they stood still. The old monk was glaring at him while protecting this young girl from a demon like him. Suddenly, the other girl appeared from the bushes with the sacred arrow as she pointed at the monks. Who are you, child? The monk questioned the black-haired girl with brown honey eyes. I'm Kagome, and we're here to bring Rin back, Kagome said, pointing at them with the sacred arrow. Sesshomaru doesn't brainwash Rin. It was his job to protect Rin from danger. So you're being bewitched by the demon too? The monk asked as his eyes were widened. Sesshomaru would never bewitch us, Kagome said with a glaring look on her face. Are you both her parents? We are, of course. She was like our daughter and younger sister to us. The monk began to glare at them. Very well. If you two want her back, he muttered, then perhaps we'll take very good care of you. All the monks were circling as Kagome and Sesshomaru were being surrounded. Sesshomaru frowned at this while the monks kept circling them as they were about to fight with them. Kagome calmed herself down as she lowered down her arrow. All of a sudden, the monks kept circling as Kagome felt dizzy by watching them. Sesshomaru was glancing around at them and didn't feel dizzy. He was still standing still and waiting for the end. Look out, Lord Sesshomaru and Kagome! Rin cried out. Without a warning, they saw them pulling out the red bane of necklace towards them and began to throw tags at Sesshomaru. They didn't throw it at Kagome because she's a human. When they kept throwing the tags at him, Kagome was being held hostage. Hey, let me go! Kagome yelled, struggling to break free as she was hitting him with the sacred bow. We won't let you come near the demon, child, the young monk said as he was guarding her against Sesshomaru. I will purify you with my own hands, Kagome warned them with a glaring look on her face. If I purify you, you'll be turned into dust. Be quiet, girl! Be gone, demon! The old monk demanded as he brought out the glowing staff to banish Sesshomaru away. There were many lightning bolts that struck him, then there were other explosions. Sesshomaru! Kagome yelled out his name. Lord Sesshomaru! Rin cried out his name as well before Kagome called out. Suddenly, before calling out his name, they knew it's never gonna happen until Sesshomaru has survived the explosions. Master, he's alive, the other monk said. Sesshomaru walked towards them as his amber eyes began to turn red. He pulled out the Tokijin sword and began to growl at them. Let them go, or else you'll all die, he commanded, threatening them. Sesshomaru began to transform himself, but almost turning himself into the giant demon dog like when he fought Inuyasha back at his father's grave. The old monk was in shock. What is he? Sesshomaru growled loudly when he was glaring at the old monk. He raised his hand, and his nails began to grow with those sharp claws. His teeth became very sharp. He swings his sword and began to attack all of them. All the monks fell to the ground. The two monks finally released Rin and Kagome from taking them hostage. Sesshomaru threatened the old monk more. If you take them again, I'll kill you, he said in a growling voice. Got it? He nodded in terror and then ran off, leaving the two girls alone. Kagome and Rin were finally free, but finally saved Rin from being taken away from them. Lord Sesshomaru, thank you for saving us, Rin said with a smile. He glanced down at the girl. Rin, he said to make Rin look up into his face. Follow me if you so choose. Yes, Rin exclaimed, following him. Kagome smiled at this as she watched them walking together. Suddenly, she sensed something. She glanced at the pink glow from the monk's pocket. She pulled it out from the pocket and saw that they had 7 shards. They have the shards. But why would they want the shards? Only demons want the shards. Kagome, are you coming? It was Sesshomaru who called out and interrupted Kagome's thoughts. She nodded her head and ran towards him. Yes, I'm coming. Meanwhile, back in Inuyasha's group, it's been 2 days since Kagome was gone from the group, which means Sango, Moroku, Shippo, and Kirara were worried about her. They didn't know why Kagome left after Inuyasha has told them, but they noticed this isn't right about Inuyasha's secrets. They probably knew Kagome went missing for 2 days. They never got along with Inuyasha's undead lover Kikyo because they never trusted her, and they didn't trust Inuyasha either. They knew Kikyo had planned this all along after what happened to Kagome. Sango knew she was the evil priestess that she couldn't trust. Inuyasha kept trying to make them get along with Kikyo, but they refused. They just left another village that was rumored that it had a demon problem. But there was a demon bear who was killed by a certain person. It looks like someone has killed the bear and the monks, Inuyasha muttered as he crossed his hands inside of the long red sleeves. How come we haven't found the shards? I don't know, Inuyasha, Kikyo murmured, glaring at the dead bodies. But the only thing I do know was that there was a demon bear, and the shards were taken by a certain someone. I think maybe it's because you're losing powers, Kikyo, Sango pointed it out. No, she's not! Inuyasha narrowed his amber eyes at Sango. Then how come she hasn't sensed any shards? Sango asked with a narrow look into her eyes at Inuyasha as Kirara mewed with the agreement. Moroku and Shippo also nodded their heads with the agreement. Inuyasha scowled at her, rolling his eyes. If you have anyone to blame on, then blame on Kagome, he said with a growl. Because Kagome is a brat, useless, abusive, and even a slut who always liked Koga and Hojo from her present home. You guys have always teamed up against me with Kagome, who has already been more of a pain than I can manage. With the pain I have already. Now shut up and stop blaming this on Kikyo. After Inuyasha argued with Sango, he began to walk with Kikyo, who was always there by his side. Sango doesn't like that. Sango saw the evil look on Kikyo's face while smirking at them. They didn't like that. Kirara growled at Kikyo, glaring at her. Well, if Kikyo doesn't have a sense of the shards, then that means she is losing her power. Although Kagome does have the other half of her powers. Chapter 6. Sesshomaru's Unknown Feelings. It's been 3 months, hasn't it? Kagome asked as she stepped into the cold river and walked forward. Yeah, it's been 3 months since you've joined us, Kagome, Rin exclaimed happily, taking Kagome by the hand as they were crossing through the river. It's been 3 months since Kagome went on a journey with Sesshomaru and the others. All 4 of them were on their way to the next village that was rumored of having a demon problem. So far, they have collected 5 shards, as Kagome knew that she was ahead of Inuyasha and Kikyo. But the thing is that Kagome missed her friends. Except for Inuyasha, who betrayed her and tried to kill her, they'd take her half of the soul to get Kikyo to become alive again. But so far, Kagome still has her half of her soul and will never die. It's a good thing that Sesshomaru had rescued her from the injuries and vowed to protect her. After they made it, Kagome decided to help Sesshomaru to hide his demon form so nobody will recognize his demonic look. She gave him a black cloak and a hoodie to make sure he wasn't cut by the guards or the monks, just like the last time when Rin got kidnapped by the monks. Kagome vowed to keep them safe from trouble. When they made it to the hut, Sesshomaru took off the cloak and sat on the big blanket and pillow. Kagome put her bag down and her sacred bow and arrows. Rin began to get some rest as she sat beside Jokin. How about we stop in the next village and get some rest? Kagome said with a soft smile. Sounds like a plan, Kagome, Jokin exclaimed, pointing it out. But first, we should get some fish and some blueberries for dinner tonight, Kagome said as she sat beside Rin and Jokin. Sesshomaru nodded with agreement. We would love to, Kagome. Yeah, I want a fish. I want to try it because I've never eaten fish before, Rin said with a happy look on her face. Well, perhaps I'll let you try it and see how you like it, Kagome replied, chuckling a bit. Kagome. Sesshomaru called her name to make her head turn around. Make sure to keep Rin healthy. I do not want her to have sickness from the poisoned fish. No problem, Sesshomaru. Kagome smiled, giving him a thumbs up. I'll make sure the fish looks healthy and clean. Sesshomaru smiled back softly. Thank you, Kagome. When she and Rin headed to the riverbank, she put on her tabi and zori, then stood up after adjusting the fish. When Kagome turned around and placed her foot on the stone, she started to fall forward. She closed her honey-brown eyes and ready for the impact. But she didn't feel the wet ground until she was wrapped in the arms around her. Kagome opened her eyes slowly. She turned around and saw that it was Sesshomaru. Kagome was in shock to see his actions. Thank you, Sesshomaru. You're welcome. But be careful next time, Kagome, Sesshomaru said with a smirk. Kagome had never seen him so happy before. But the question is, was Sesshomaru having feelings for Kagome? Kagome didn't notice his expression, but she knew what he feels. After this, Sesshomaru helped her get her feet up, and Kagome grabbed onto his kimono chest. Well, we should start gathering some fish for dinner, Kagome said with a soft blush on her face as she smiled and glanced at his eyes. Of course, Sesshomaru replied as he stared into her beautiful honey-brown eyes. He began to blush back softly when he kept staring at the young priestess. He thought she was beautiful because of her midnight black hair and autumn honey-brown eyes. But he doesn't want to be fallen in love with a human just like his father did in the past. Flashback. Sesshomaru went to go find his father, Lord Inu no Taisho. He's been searching for him in the forest. He can smell the scent coming from the other side of the woods, so he went to see and find out who it is. But apparently, he found his father was standing in front of a human girl, Princess Izayoi. This human girl looks like she's 15 or 19 years old when she looked younger. He noticed when Princess Izayoi had dropped the apple, she was stopped by Inu Taisho, who stood in front of her as he stared at the red apple. Izayoi thought he wanted an apple, so she passes it to him. But she was smacked in the hand to make her drop an apple by Sesshomaru's father. Sesshomaru just saw it when he noticed Inu Taisho wasn't interested. Oh, I'm very sorry, sir. Izayoi stuttered nervously. I didn't know you hated apples. I'll just leave you alone, and why should I hate apples, young one? Inu Taisho asked her. His voice sounded too kind towards the princess. I thought they were poison or something. Oh, no, sir, Izayoi said. They're not poison. It tastes like juice. Apples are good for you. I promise you it's not poison. You don't have to call me sir, human, Inu Taisho said with a soft smile. You can call me Inu no Taisho, but call me Inu Taisho or Toga. Whatever you'd like to call me. I'm Princess Izayoi, by the way, she replied with her beautiful red lips. Call me Izayoi if you like. Inu Taisho began to smirk at her. Izayoi is such a beautiful name for a young woman like you. Izayoi chuckled as she blushed softly. Thank you, Inu Taisho. That was nice of you. But I wanted to apologize for the offerings. I merely thought you'd like them. You don't need to apologize, Izayoi. Inu Taisho smiled kindly. I thought apples tasted sweeter because I've tasted a lot. Izayoi smiled back as she was about to say something to him. They heard a voice was calling out the name that made her turn around. Lady Izayoi, where are you? It's time to come back home. A servant called out her name loudly. Izayoi bowed down to the great dog demon with a lovely smile. It was nice to meet you, Inu Taisho, she said as she headed back to the castle where she lives. Sesshomaru knew what was going on. His father has fallen for the human-like princess. He watched his father pick up an apple, then tasted it. Sesshomaru doesn't understand why he has fallen in love with Princess Izayoi. He began to feel furious when he realized he never loved his mother, Inukimi. Flashback ends. After she and his father had Inuyasha, Inu Taisho had died during the battle with the dragon. And then the warrior named Takamaru, who had fallen in love with Izayoi and was jealous of him. Sesshomaru started to grow hatred towards Inuyasha and his human mother because of Inu Taisho's death. First of all, he couldn't understand why Inu Taisho left his mother with that human woman like Izayoi, then bore him a son. Second of all, he couldn't understand why his foolish half-brother Inuyasha would choose a dead priestess like Kikyo over poor Kagome. He soon realized that Kagome was indeed a beautiful young girl. Sesshomaru knew she was kind towards Rin and Jokin and helped them out on their journey. He saw the way Kagome treated Rin kindly and how she was taking care of her. Although Kagome helped everyone out, while healing the sick people and injured people. She was powerful as well, like a priestess. He noticed that when he saw the way she defeated demons on her own with the sacred arrows. What's this feeling? Sesshomaru questioned himself in his thoughts. I'm not falling for a human like Kagome. I'm not going to be just like my father back then. Even though I couldn't believe my foolish little brother would abandon her for the dead priestess. Later that night, after they were done fishing, they headed back to the hut and set the fire to heat the fishes. They heard the crickets singing from outside in the field loudly. It was just nighttime. It was always like this whenever they camped out in the woods. But they were still inside of the hut and cooking some fish. After they were done cooking it, they began to eat. Rin began to taste it, and when she took a bite, she tasted it, and it was amazing. Kagome was happy to see that Rin was loving it. Sesshomaru? Kagome called, breaking the silence. Sesshomaru turned his head at her. Do you ever miss your father before what happened during the battle? Kagome asked him as she didn't want him to feel stress. Sesshomaru sighed deeply and softly. Yes, he told her. Every time I kept visiting my father's grave, I asked myself why my father had given Inuyasha the Tetsaiga sword. My father wanted me to have the Tenseiga. Sword. All I ever wanted was the Tetsaiga sword, but my father refused for me to have the sword. This is why I've grown hatred towards Inuyasha for having the Tetsaiga sword. Sesshomaru, you don't have to hate Inuyasha, Kagome said as she placed her hands onto his. But I know why Inuyasha betrayed me by taking the half of my soul, then bringing it back to Kikyo to live again. Sesshomaru, you don't just blame Inuyasha and his mother for causing your father's death. Blame it on the dragon who wounded your father. She heard Sesshomaru chuckle. Why should I? Well, because I want you to blame the Ryokotse dragon who caused his death, Kagome said as she glanced at his eyes. Not Inuyasha and his mother. They would never do that. I agree with you, Kagome, Rin said with an agreement look on her face. Rin, don't take Kagome's side. Inuyasha is the one who caused his father's death. And even though Inuyasha tried to kill Kagome, Jokin yelled at Rin, pointing at the staff. That's not true, Jokin, Rin argued. Inuyasha and his mother would never cause him his death. It was the dragon who did it. Sesshomaru glanced his amber eyes calmly at Jokin, who argued back. You stupid girl! You don't get it! Inuyasha is such a jerk, and a brutal one who has picked the dead priestess over Kagome and then tried to kill her. Suddenly, Jokin was hit in the back of his head by Sesshomaru, who interrupted their argument about the Ryokotse and Inuyasha who caused his father's death. Although Sesshomaru gets annoyed by their argument, he does still care for Rin and Kagome. Jokin, shut up and never speak of the past again. Sesshomaru demanded him sharply, which made Jokin scared. Yes, my lord, Jokin stuttered nervously, then he stopped talking about the past. Sesshomaru turned his head at her. Kagome. Yes? Do you ever miss your group? Even Inuyasha? Sesshomaru questioned her curiously. Kagome sighed sadly and nodded her head. Yes, I do, she murmured. I miss my friends, except Inuyasha and Kikyo, who tried to kill me. I see, Sesshomaru murmured back, softening his eyes. Kagome, how many shards do we have? Kagome looked at them with the bare hand she was carrying. There is only 5 of them, she said, glancing at it. But, first of all, Sesshomaru, I plan to defeat Naraku and then take the Shikon jewel that he has stolen from us. But Kikyo did it. She's the one who took the Shikon jewel and then gave it to Naraku. That's why I planned to defeat Naraku on my own before Inuyasha drove me into the cliff and I almost died. Sesshomaru blinked his eyes a bit. Are you saying that Inuyasha won't let you go along by yourself because he thought you were weak? Kagome nodded. Sometimes, but all I ever wanted to be was stronger than Naraku, so I'll be finally taking the jewel then restoring it. We can help you defeat Naraku, Kagome, Rin said, sitting next to her. Lord Sesshomaru fought bravely, and maybe he can protect you from Naraku. She smiled at the little girl kindly. Thank you, Rin. Let's get some rest, everyone, Sesshomaru murmured, standing up straight. We have a long journey tomorrow. They nodded in agreement. After they were done eating the fish, they put the fire down, then getting some rest. Jockin sat beside the wall and began to fall asleep. Kagome laid beside Rin. Sesshomaru laid on the big white fluffy tail as he wrapped it around him. He glanced at the girls who were sleeping together. He smirked at this, then closed his eyes softly and began to fall asleep. Sesshomaru thought it wasn't a bad job for protecting Kagome and Rin from danger.